Good morning and welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media for HAR, and I'm happy this morning to be joined by Jeff Havsy from Moody's, and he's going to talk to us about all things commercial real estate and how it impacts residential realtors as well. So we have a lot to talk about, but welcome to the program, Jeff.
Thank you for having me, Christina, excuse me. Happy Monday. Hope you're having a lovely day there in Houston. It's beautiful here in suburban Boston.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us from afar this morning. Again, this is your first appearance on our program. We often focus on residential real estate, but obviously commercial does have an impact on where people move, which we'll talk about today, where people work. So it really is an important part of kind of real estate as a whole. So we're excited to dive into it with you. Also, you're going to be speaking at an HAR event next month, which you can tell us about later in the program. And of course, we'll share all the details for the people tuning in the comments. But before we dive into everything, Jeff, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
All right, thank you. So I said, with Moody's. I'm the industry practice lead for commercial real estate. I've been with Moody's for about 3 years now. Prior to joining Moody's, I was CBRE's chief economist for the Americas, which brought me out to Boston, and I ran their forecasting unit. Prior to that, I worked at a couple of different jobs. I was with what was LaSalle Partners, now became part of JLL. But my first job out of school was designing new financial products at the Chicago Board of Trade. I started working on a real estate futures contract, which is how I ended up in commercial real estate. So a little bit of a different winding path, but it's been a great experience.
That's wonderful. All things always tie back to real estate in some way, we find. Well, very good. So, in the last 4 years, really since, I guess it's maybe since about April 2020, people started thinking about the office market, right? And we've seen so many headlines since then about the office market. What is the current status of the office market, and exactly how many offices do we need in this current environment?
So that's a really interesting question, and it's a very complex question, right? Because everybody says, oh, office is dead, we're done with office. We know it's not that simple. I heard a great line the other day, and it applied to retail, but it was repurposed, which is, office isn't overbuilt, it's currently under demolished. So we have a problem in that we have too many old offices, but we still need office. And you look, we're still building new office buildings. But those new office buildings we are building today are very different than some of that older Class B, Class C, even lower space. So the office market is struggling. Vacancy rates are high. They're above 20% nationally. Obviously, it varies market to market. But what you're seeing is companies realizing I need some type of hybrid solution. Now, there are some totally remote and some 5 days a week in the office, but most companies are trying to find out what is the right number for me. And even within a given company, it may vary by department, right? So there's department, but there's value, right, to prep for this. I put my head down. I was looking at some data. I don't need to be in the office, right? I can do that alone, and I can save the commute time. The flip side of that is when I'm in the office and I run into colleagues and I see not only my team, but those accidental interactions, there's a lot of value there. I bumped into somebody, we started talking, and we realized, hey, wait, if we work together, we can solve this other thing. Those things happen and they increase productivity, they increase economic growth. The other thing that we see is training really matters. And especially young people entering the workforce for the first time, maybe even their second job, you're not going to jump on a Zoom to call your boss and say, hey, can you help me? But you'll certainly lean over to the next cubicle or pop into his or her office and say, hey, wait, I'm working on this. So it's finding that right mix. Now then, how we work is also changing. I mean, anybody in favor of those giant open floor plans that we've had for the past 30 years? Probably not, right? So therefore, even if firms are downsizing the amount of space they need, they're actually going to be spending more to try to get it right. You need collaborative areas, but you also need independent workspace, and you need a mix in different sizes, and that actually costs money. So everybody thinks, oh, wait, companies that are just going to save money by downsizing. Well, if they do it right, they actually may not. It might not be cheaper, but the flip side of it is they will enhance productivity, so therefore they will be making more money and benefiting from that.
Yeah.
They'll still have to spend the same amount, but the revenue should increase a lot on the top line.
Oh, that's
Um,
really great insight. Thank you. Yeah.
and then we think about it, right? If we're not going to the office every day, does
Mm-hmm.
that mean we can live slightly different, right? If you were
Right.
commuting 5 days a week, that's going to impact where you may want to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Meaning, sorry, go
yeah, I
ahead.
mean, no, yeah, I mean, really, that takes us into the next question I had for you because work from home or maybe hybrid 1, 2 days in the office has really become the norm for many businesses. That would take up those office spaces. So, how does that impact where people live? Because again, I remember headlines from late 2020, early 2021 that people are just moving far away from all the cities because they don't need to live there anymore. So, has that been the case?
Well, again, that's more of a headline than the data.
Mm-hmm.
What we found though is people were moving further out. There were people that were going to, hey, I'm going to go live in the Rockies somewhere and ski all winter. Those are fewer and far between. Well, what we did see is people move out of the city centers, maybe more to the exurbs, and say, I can get more space for lower cost. Now that they have to commute, it's a little bit different, right? So maybe I don't go as far out as I was once thinking, but I can still change where I was. I don't need to be as close to the office if I'm not commuting 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
It depends. Hey, how many days am I commuting? What type of commute am I willing to put up with? Am I willing to take public transit from further out? It may not be as convenient, it may take me a little longer, but if I don't have to drive, I'll do that. So therefore, even though I'm at the end of the train line, because I'm only doing it 1 or 2 days a week, I'm willing to put up with it rather than driving that extra distance. So
Mm-hmm.
I think people are still figuring it out, especially as companies are changing that requirement and how often people need to be in the office. But that change is also impacting where people live. Obviously, that impacts both renters, homeowners, it impacts apartments, impacts home rentals.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all intertwined, and we're still seeing it. There's no answer yet because it's constantly changing as people still try to figure out what is the need to be in the office, where
Mm-hmm.
do I need to be, and then they can figure out how does that impact where I want to live, how much am I willing to do, right? Because maybe you're in a great school district, you have kids. Are you willing to, a parent may be willing, you know what? I'm going to stay this far out. I'll just find a way to make it work because I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to uproot my kids.
Right.
Or I'm nearing retirement. I may make some changes that way. So we see still a lot of moving pieces on the chessboard.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also as businesses change their policies, we've also seen those headlines with we're bringing everybody back into the office. So really, it's all just kind of a waiting game. It sounds like to see what the actual end result will be, or if there will be just a solid answer on that. So very good. Thank you so much for that insight, Jeff. They also there's a saying that retail follows rooftops, meaning if they're building homes there, retail is sure to follow. So, what is the current status of the retail commercial market?
So the retail commercial market is the place to be right now. Over the past decade, it had been suffering, right? Retail for a long time was the poor stepchild. It was really kind of the lowest performer. And now it's the belle of the ball. B malls are a little bit of an exception, but other than that, whether you have a neighborhood center, a community-based center, both of them often grocery anchored, a power center, a fortress mall, any other type of experiential retail, they're doing great. And what we're finding for the first time in 2022 in almost 15 years, we saw more store openings than store closings. 2023 was that way also. And these new concepts are going into different types of places. So I have a daughter, she's 11. I don't know if you've ever been or any of our audience has been. We went to Monster Golf. It's an indoor glow in the dark mini golf. It was a blast, by the way. But it was in this ugly shopping center, something that you would have thought nobody would ever want to be there. But given the concept, it worked out fine. And we're seeing more of those types of things where the outside of the center doesn't necessarily have to be as pretty, and we're getting space taken up in some of these non-traditional or some of these lower, what would have been lower level retail,
Mm-hmm.
in what might have been a failed or a failing type of center before. We haven't built that much retail. That's starting to change as we see, obviously, with new developments in the further exurbs or redevelopments. But for a while, retail, there wasn't a lot. We now have greater demand, and that is influencing the retail market. Rents are rising. We're also seeing a lot more mixed use. So you may take that older failed mall, you're seeing it change in the type of retail it is. You're seeing residential go in there, and that can be both for sale residential, for rent, or a combination. Depending on the plot of land, you can have multi-story or single story. So you're getting a mixed use with a component of retail, a component of residential, and potentially office or hotel, depending how big that site is. The other thing we're seeing too is in the suburbs more than in the cities, some of these older office buildings that are being knocked down and repurposed, you're putting in residential there, but you're also putting in retail as part of that. So you're really seeing a change to the retail market, but retail has been doing great, and that is tied into the housing market.
Okay. So yeah, that was my next question there. Why is that the best performing class at this time? Is it because of the creative solutions, or is there another factor?
I think it's a combination, right? We had built a lot over the last decade. We've seen new concepts come in from the retailers themselves, both goods but also services, right? The experiential retail, the restaurants, the bars, etc. I mean, 10 years ago, did you know any place that had axe throwing? Right. So these are neat ideas, and I don't know if you've ever done it. It was definitely an experience. So we're seeing these new concepts. We're seeing the lack of new supply, and then we're seeing demand that because it's in a different location, as you mentioned earlier, right? Things that may have been in the city center, people are moving further out, so we need some of that new supply in some new locations. So that is driving demand too. So it's a combination of all those pieces together that have really enhanced the retail market.
Makes sense. Thank you. So, and I've seen so many examples in my area. A Home Depot that moved, they moved it out and moved it into a new shopping center, pretty new shopping center. Basically, would in the past kind of demolish that old shopping center, but they turned it into a trampoline park and it's thriving. So,
Exactly. That you're
yeah,
spot on.
yeah, yeah. Very
Don't
good.
take my job, right? You're not going to be on top.
No, no, no. Well, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about apartments because we've seen a lot of activity in the single family rental market, especially here in Houston. It's kind of become a solution to high prices and high mortgage interest rates is looking into the rental market. What's the current status of apartments?
So we're seeing record supply in terms of apartments, and that is easing some of the rent burden. Not a lot, right? Rents have gone up a lot, depending on where you're looking, 30, 40% over the last several years. So a 2 to 3 or even 5% decline is not offsetting that. But this new supply is making it a little bit easier. Now, one thing we do have to worry about with Houston, and again, it's a perception for Houston, not necessarily reality. You hear about the hurricanes and people say, oh, wait, what's going to happen? What's going on in Houston, right? I get it. It's only a very small area that has been impacted by some of that water damage, but that is some of the national worry that you see about Houston that could be a potential headwind. But overall, Houston's apartment market, again, a little bit soft, but that supply pipeline is slowing down. There aren't as many new starts. So going into 2025 and 2026, we should see more rent growth again, which will put pressure on renters. So we have to figure out how are they going to be able to afford it. But if you're a landlord, you should be in pretty good shape, depending on what your financing is, how you did things. And to your point, right, there is substitution between build to rent or single family rental and apartment going back and forth. There is still a lack of housing overall, though, in the Houston market relative to the number of people coming in.
Okay. So how long do you anticipate the apartment growth remaining negative?
So I think by the end of this year, we should start to see a turn, and then again in 2025, it should pick up a bit as that new supply is hit. There isn't a lot of new supply behind that, and we start to see a little bit of an acceleration in rents.
Okay, very good. If you have questions for Jeff, type those into the comments and we'll get to as many as we can. So far, I've just seen a lot of people saying good morning, howdy. Great way to start a Monday morning. I did see one comment that came in from Hina on YouTube that said, but I also see a lot of strip malls sitting vacant around Houston. So a lot of places still that we need to find those creative solutions like you're talking about.
Absolutely, and Houston was certainly one of the places where we saw tremendous overbuilding. So it's not going to go away overnight, right? And I did not mean to imply that. So thank you for helping me clarify that. But we are seeing the number of centers that are vacant or partially full shrink, and or we're seeing they're vacant and now they're partially full. So it is definitely moving in the right direction. But yes, not all the problems have been solved. I did not mean to imply that. There's
Yeah, very good. So let's talk about other challenges. What challenges is the commercial real estate market facing right now?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things we talked about office, right? You have some of this older office. What
Mm-hmm.
do you do with it? Yes, you can knock it down. The question, right? That's not always great for the environment. What is the cost? In a suburban location, it's a little bit cheaper to knock it down, but if you're in more of an infill location, you can't just bulldoze it or blow it up. You have to be careful how you take it down.
Mm-hmm.
That adds to the cost. And then what are you going to replace it with? What are you
Mm-hmm.
going to build? And obviously that depends where the location is, but the life science market was something that Houston had been growing, right? But that's slowing as there isn't as much capital. So, you know, apartments or something, hotels, though, again, hotels were getting a little overbuilt. We're seeing a pullback due to the higher cost. So the question is, how do you repurpose some of that older office space? Can you repurpose the existing building or do you have to knock it down? And then what do you do with that? How do you handle parking if you're changing the use case? How do you handle getting people in and out if it's not parking, but ingress, egress? So it is a little more challenging. It doesn't mean that it can't be done, but it's just something that we need to work through.
Mm-hmm.
Houston's a little bit easier than some other markets in the country. There's some other places in the Northeast and the Midwest where it's a little more challenging in terms of zoning and to get the permitting done.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still some headwinds there because it's not just snap your fingers and it happens.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that has come up recently, I've heard, is this impression of Houston as, oh, it gets hit by a hurricane every year.
Mm-hmm.
So that I worry a little bit about for Houston. Now, the flip side of that, Chevron's coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Chevron is building bringing a ton of new jobs, but the fact that it's bringing a headquarters from a major corporation in the S&P 500 and all the auxiliary services that are going to go with that, the lawyers and the accountants and even the caterers to bring in lunches, that's great for Houston.
Yeah.
So you do have that, and that's a tailwind that really will help. But that alone isn't going to bring a ton of jobs right away, but it does raise Houston's profile in the global marketplace where it is competing against these other cities. So that is helpful. So you have kind of two things that are pushing against each other at the moment.
Very good. We had a question that came in from Mario. He's asking, what do you see as potential rate reductions by the feds?
Everybody's favorite question. When's the Fed going to lower my interest rate?
Yeah.
Uh, I expect one this year. Now it's funny. There are economists who are more optimistic than I am. Now, again, when you hear the words economist and optimistic in the same sentence, it's against the union rules. I'm just saying. But I'm just expecting one rate cut this year. We may see one depending early 25. It could roll into the very end of 24 in December. But
Mm-hmm.
we're likely to see something in September and then nothing, given the election. The Fed doesn't want to politicize that. It's not going to dramatically change rates, but it does send a signal. And again,
Mm-hmm.
similar we talked about Chevron, even though it's not bringing tons of jobs, it's a signal to the market. It says Houston is still here and we're a player. The Fed cutting rates sends a signal to the market. Hey, things are going to ease going forward. It helps in terms of financing. So psychologically, it'll be a big thing for the market, even if it's only one rate cut that doesn't change the math, but
Mm-hmm.
it just changes the psychology.
Okay. Thank you for that. A couple more questions that came in, or actually, there's a comment here from Nellie who practices commercial. She said, yes, I have commercial real estate clients that don't want to look at moving to Houston because the insurance is too high.
Yeah, so insurance is a big issue not only in Houston but around the country. We're seeing that whether you're in Florida, whether you're in California with the wildfires, even in the Northeast or the Midwest where you may have fewer natural disasters. But we're actually seeing more convex storms rather than
Mm-hmm.
named storms. That means you have a hail storm that comes through that causes damage, things like that. We're seeing more of those everywhere, so insurance costs are up. We actually just published a paper on this. Yeah, insurance is a problem, but
Mm-hmm.
all your costs are up right now. Your
Mm-hmm.
labor cost of running the buildings, especially on the apartment side. So again, feel free to go to Moody's website on the CRE side. We talk about this. Your capital costs are going up of fixing up apartments. As I mentioned, your property management costs, your property taxes. So it's not just an insurance thing, it's all of these costs that are higher. So you're getting squeezed with higher expenses, lower rent, there's pressure in the market right now. Insurance is part of that, but it's not the only thing, unfortunately.
Okay, very good. A few other comments here. We just talked about apartments, but we may have missed this. Julia asked, "Do we have an oversupply of apartment buildings in Houston? How long will that last?" So, can you just give us a brief recap
Yeah,
on what
so
you said there?
there's definitely not an oversupply of apartments,
Mm-hmm.
but the supply, given the expectations of where rents would be relative to those construction,
Mm-hmm.
right? So rents have gone up dramatically, and then people assumed when they built some of those new apartments, rents would keep going up. They are going to have some issues depending on how they did their financing. So you may have some pressure within the apartment market, right? There was a big 1031 buyer who over leveraged because they did a poor job of financing. You're going to see more stories like that.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean there's too many apartments. We actually have a shortage of housing in Houston, but you have some people that did incorrect assumptions either on their pro formas or on their financing if they bought existing units, and that's where you're going to see some distress. So those are kind of two different things that I want to make sure we separate. So there is not an oversupply, but
Mm-hmm.
there is a pricing pressure relative to pro formas of either new construction or when people bought units from a previous owner and assumed where rents would be, and they financed that accordingly.
Okay, very good. A couple more comments I wanted to briefly share. Maria said, I've seen specialty Airbnbs being fashioned from older buildings, for example, a car mechanic shop. Um,
Absolutely. That competes. Those type of things though compete more on the against the hotels, right? They're
mhm,
unique stays, so they're not in the apartment market as much. Not to say they can't become part of that or change,
mhm,
right? It's easy to do that, but we're seeing that more on the hospitality side than on the rental side. What
mhm,
was the building in Houston? And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name that just went into foreclosure in downtown. There was a very old building. I think it was built in the 20s. It's a very cool, like that to me
mhm,
is a building that may be converted to apartments. And a couple of them may become either Airbnbs or a hotel operator may take a few floors.
mhm.
So that's a great idea where you can get a conversion of a cool old building that's got cool trim and things like that versus your 1960s office building were like, oh God, why would anyone?
All right, very good. Another just quick comment from Nellie. She said she has seen an increase in second generation restaurant clients. So she's seen that growing for her. I didn't have a question for you on restaurants, but is there anything you want to share on that sector?
I think that's part of that new concepts. We're seeing a
Mm-hmm.
number of them. For a while, there was the combined kitchens for delivery. We're actually seeing that market soften a lot now, so that's a risk. But the
Mm-hmm.
individual restaurants in locations, we're seeing all sorts of new concepts. In addition to sometimes we're seeing combined. The example that I like to give because it works nationally is sometimes you'll see a Baskin and Robbins partner, right? Because ice cream is not sold year round. They were partnered with like a Dunkin' Donuts,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can shift the risk. We're seeing that with restaurants where there may be some savings or combination in the back, but it's two different restaurants next to each other uh,
Mm-hmm.
in other places.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came in. in multifamily. Actually, Dylan was asking, I don't know if you talked about this, but what are you seeing in multifamily? When I'm working with my investors, not many deals make sense because of the financing costs or mortgage. Can you share any insight in the multifamily sector?
Right, and that's kind of what we were just
Yeah.
discussing with the apartments, right? Where financing costs are high.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is it insurance, but it's also labor costs, capital costs, things like that. And rents, it sounds like his investors are cautious, which makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
they didn't assume great rent growth. It's hard to get it to pencil out right now, given where the financing costs are, the expenses are, and the assumed rent growth. There aren't as many. Now, that being
Mm-hmm.
said, there are people that did this 2 years ago that made some bad assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those distressed properties may be coming to the market, Dylan. So you may be able to have your clients find some distress. Now, there's a fair amount of capital that's going to be looking on that at that, so you might have some competition. As I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
there was the big 1031 in Houston that I had to give back. So there may be opportunities where people made bad decisions, and then you can help clean up their mess and get your investors properties with good underwriting because they did bad underwriting.
Okay. Thank you for that. So we obviously for this program we do have a lot of residential real estate agents as well as commercial. But for those residential real estate agents that maybe practice commercial part time or they've been considering commercial, what advice do you have for residential realtors that might be interested in commercial?
I think one of the biggest things is understanding the market and understanding where you can add value. So saying not
Mm-hmm.
only is it, hey, here are the properties, but here are the trends in the market. Here's what we're seeing. Here's some nuances. So being a trusted advisor,
Mm-hmm.
not just a broker. You need to be able to say, you know what? Walk away from that one. That is a bad decision for you rather than saying, yeah, I want the deal. No, no, no. Commercial ends up being a repeat business.
Mm-hmm.
So by being a trusted advisor and gaining the trust of your clients, by understanding trends, by understanding the nuances in the market, you really almost become their partner and both of you benefit from that. But it takes some work in that you need to learn the nuances of whatever you do, whether it's industrial, whether it's retail, whether it's apartment, in addition to selling single family,
Mm-hmm.
but understanding all those influences, the demographics, GDP growth, and that can make you as a trusted advisor rather than just a broker. And then they can rely on you more, and that will lead to greater repeat business.
Excellent, excellent advice. Question here from TJ. How is the industrial market going to evolve when they stop building all these new 100,000 square foot tilt wall projects all over town?
Thank you, TJ. So I'm going to get on my soapbox, and this is one of my little things here. Is everybody thinks, oh, industrial is great, and it is doing well, and we're buying more, online. However, if you've noticed, the roofs keep rising, so we need to stop thinking about square footage and think about it in cubic feet. So if the roof had been 24 feet on that 100,000 square footer that TJ is talking about, and now it's a 32-foot roof, you've increased the cubic space a lot more. And
Mm-hmm.
what you have is racking systems that are more expensive than the buildings themselves. You need better power. They have a lot of robots, so you need super flat floors. So we're really seeing a more advanced industrial sector, and that's going to lead to greater functional obsolescence sooner for some of the buildings that do not have that. So it's something to really watch, and understanding those types of nuances, I think, is going to be really important. Over the past decade, you could buy any industrial, rising tide, didn't matter. That's not going to be the same going forward. You're going to have to be much better, much smarter, and understand, does my building have the latest technology? Can it handle the latest generation of robots and racking where I may have fewer people and more automation? And can my
Mm-hmm.
building do that to get in?
Okay, great, great insight. Another question here from Nellie. Do you see a big issue with the multifamily syndication deals that were acquired in the 2020 to 2022 becoming an issue for the banks, refinancing, disposition?
Absolutely. And that's what I
Mm-hmm.
was mentioning before is there were some poor underwriting. I guess might be one of the ways I would phrase that. I think there's going to be a problem. Now, that being
Mhm.
said, there's a lot of distressed capital waiting on the sides for that distress to go forward. Um, I don't see it as big as a problem with the banks, right? Because a lot of that went into CMBS, it went elsewhere. So banks have some of that, but not as much as you might think. So the good news is I don't think it's going to cause distress in the banking system. Yes, there are going to be losses, but it's going to be widely dispersed among different types of financial institutions, banks being one of those, but not the only ones.
Mhm.
They will have trouble refinancing, and again, a lot of times some of those 1031s or syndications cannot raise additional capital, but there's going to be people waiting on the sidelines to go take advantage of that. So I actually see that clearing, and I see some people making some money to take advantage of some of that poor underwriting from previous or poor
Mhm.
financing decisions. They went with floating rate in 2021 and it moved up significantly.
Okay, very good. Another quick question here. You were mentioning about those larger buildings and the cubic square feet and all of that. Nellie's asking, is that the same for storage facilities?
Now, storage facilities have been relatively the same, right? You get 8 by 8, 10 by 10, climate
Mm-hmm.
controlled or not. Those haven't really changed. We may see bigger facilities where it might have been a 3-story and now it's a 4-story, so you have more units
Mm-hmm.
that you have to lease out. But those size of those units aren't changing. Now, the mix may be, right? Somebody may have said, hey, I had more 8 by 8s before, now I have more 10 by 8s or 10 by
Mm-hmm.
10s, but it's not moving up in terms of cubic feet the way we're seeing it on the industrial side.
Okay, very good. Um, So I wanted to hear from you a little bit about what to expect. I know you're speaking at an event here in Houston next month. What can we expect to learn from you, from your presentation at the upcoming 2024 Economic Outlook that our commercial division, Comgate, is putting on?
Absolutely. So I'm really looking forward to being there. I'm hoping, you're going to give me good weather, so I'm counting on you for that. I think we're going to dive into the data a little more, right? We're going to use some hard numbers. Today's discussion was more of a higher level. We'll bring in a lot more data, and we're
Mhm.
actually going to compare Houston to the rest of the Texas Triangle.
Mhm.
I really think that's important, right? How does Houston compare to Dallas? And I don't just mean relative to the Cowboys or relative to the Rangers, but I think it will look to see how does Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin compare, where their strategic advantages for which market and why. So I think that'll be really interesting. In addition to the national outlook, we'll dive in a little more on interest rates. We're actually going to talk about GDP and productivity growth and how that
Mhm.
might impact inflation. So I think we'll have more time to really dive deeper and be able to take additional questions as they see that data from the audience to really get it more nuanced, and hopefully that makes this audience a better trusted advisor to their clients.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, thank you. You've shared so much great information. In fact, we just had a comment from Lydia said, "Thank you, great information." It's exactly what I was thinking. What is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience today?
I just want to say, I think it's important to always stay on top of what's going on in the market, right? Because things change so quickly. And just when you think you know it, right, some new data comes out. So constantly learning, constantly use the resources that you guys have, because you have a lot of great stuff on your website for your members.
Mhm.
So one of the things is always be learning. And I think that is probably the most important thing. And thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Absolutely. Well, another way to learn is to attend that 2024 Economic Outlook. We did share a link to that in the comments, so be sure to click that button and go check it out. It is, again, a great economic outlook that you're going to hear from Jeff, and also a networking opportunity. So, great for commercial realtors, but also those residential realtors that have an interest in commercial. So, be sure to click that link in the comments and go check that out. Again, a lot of thank yous rolling in the comments. We truly appreciate everything that you had to share with us today, Jeff.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time.
Absolutely. Well, before we go, I just want to let everyone know that next Monday, the 19th, we are going to have HAR's legal counsel, Grant Harpold, back on the program. He's going to share all of the updates, everything you need to know regarding the NAR settlement and the MLS changes that are taking place later this week. He's going to fill us in on everything that you need to know. So be sure to tune in next Monday at 9 a.m. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.